The most important game that nobody's talking about is Kansas at Illinois. That's Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks, joining me here on the show. Kind of a big week for me, Derek, because I picked Kansas to make the Big 12 championship game this year. And if you are a team of that caliber, this is a game as a 5-point road favorite against an Illinois team that you go in and win, and you look pretty good doing it.
Yeah, I think what you just brought up is kind of funny because that's kind of the things the process I've been taking myself through for this game, that this game doesn't matter. Like this game, if you're talking Big 12 championship, you're talking college football playoff, like this doesn't matter to that. You could lose this game and win the rest, and you're still winning the Big 12 championship. But what you just said, if you're going to do those other things, this feels like a precursor to that, just in terms of this is one that if you are going to beat Kansas State or Iowa State or some of these other schools, those games should be a little bit harder than this game is, right? So go out there and win this game. And last year, I think it was a good springboard for them early in the season. You beat them in week 2, and it set up some positive momentum. And I think that's what you come out of this with as well. You win this game, you set up some early season momentum, especially into that UNLV game in week 3, which looks a little bit more interesting after they kind of just beat up on Houston.
Do not overlook UNLV. They throttled Houston. Now, granted, Houston might go 0-12 this year. That is a very real possibility when you look at their schedule and what everybody's expectations are for them coming into this year, mine included. I thought they lose to UNLV. Didn't think they would lose that badly. UNLV's got a couple of interesting FBS games. They also play Syracuse, or Power 4 games, rather. But getting back to this matchup, Kansas, Illinois. Kansas wins the game if what, Derek?
I think it goes a couple ways. If you want to look at stopping the running game of Illinois, you look at the games that Kansas is giving up, 4.5 or more yards per carry over the time that Brian Borland and Lance Leipold is here. They're losing like basically a majority of those games, versus when you're giving up way less, the record is outstanding in what they've been able to do. And what do you look at with a Brett Bielema offense with Illinois? You look at them being a team who wants to establish the run, be physical. I think they have the most drafted offensive linemen of any active head coach under Brett Bielema now that Nick Saban has retired. And last year, the offensive line had kind of a down year, but it seems like this year maybe back up more to snuff. They had a J.C. Davis, who's a really good left tackle transfer from New Mexico. And they have a 6'3", 250-pound running back, Caden Fagan, who didn't really play in the Kansas game. I think he had one carry for like 3 or 4 yards in that game. He came on late as the season went on last year as a freshman. If you can slow him down and stop the running game a little bit, I feel good about the Kansas offense being able to put up points in this game. Illinois secondary was not good last year. It might be a little bit better this year. We'll wait and see. Tough to tell based on what they did in week 1 against Eastern Illinois. The defensive line for Illinois, they departed a couple key players. Jerzon Newton was probably the best defender in that game against Kansas last year and had a couple good pressures, but he's gone. Basically, you lose a lot on the D-line, and they only had 1 sack against Eastern Illinois. They only had 3 tackles for loss. Now, they do have a good linebacking core, but still, I feel like Kansas, which got over 200 rushing yards from Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw last year against Illinois, which had Jalen Daniels in that game, and he was able to hit some big passing plays downfield. I think Kansas is going to be able to score enough. It's, are you able to stop the run and get their offense off the field and prevent them from playing a possession game where they keep your offense off the field?
One of the highest profile coordinator hires in the offseason was Andy Kotelnicki, poached away from Kansas. He's over at Penn State, made immediate impact in their first game against West Virginia in week 1 in a dominant win. How do you feel about this Kansas offense without him there?
So I feel good right now. Jeff Grimes came in during the pre-season or the pre-bowl practices, I guess you would say. And the staff made sure that he was coming along to join with their lingo, with some of their formations, their play calling. He was going to obviously, and he is, calling plays and he is adding his own flair and twist on everything and some of what he likes to do, which seems to be more jet sweeps and screens than maybe what Andy Kotelnicki was running. But for the most part, it's a very similar offense to what they were running. And that was part of the idea of wanting to go out and make that hire. So I feel good about where the offense is at. I actually think that Jeff Grimes is a better recruiter than Andy Kotelnicki, and we're seeing that on the recruiting trail. Kotelnicki wasn't really bringing those guys in. As far as the game day play calling, there's 2 things that'll be interesting. One is just, does it have the same flow and creativity now that we're getting into the real games? Because it's not a real playbook against the FCS opponent. You're not going to give out everything that you want to do that they did against Lindenwood. So I think we're going to learn a little bit more of this one. But the other part that I think can actually be a boon for Kansas, even if maybe the creativity is a little more lacking, maybe if Andy Kotelicki is a little bit of an in-game caller, one thing that they can get back is that, and part of this is on the head coach as well, is the aggressiveness on fourth downs. So Kansas has not been an aggressive team. They've been basically bottom 2 in the Big 12 the last 2 seasons in terms of going for it on fourth down. And when you have what for Kansas has been a really good offense with good quarterback play and has been not as good of a defense, you would think they would be more aggressive on those fourth down play calls. And again, I don't know where Lance Leipold versus Jeff Grimes kind of comes in versus Andy Kotelicki comes into all that, but you look at what Jeff Grimes did at Baylor, and they went for fourth down over 90 times in the last 2 years at Baylor. Kansas during that same period was less than half that mark. So if you are going for it more on fourth down, you're aggressive, and we saw that a little bit in the FCS game. They had a couple fourth downs that they went for. They had a 4th and goal that they went for. With some of the backups in the early part of the third quarter. I think that's a way that they can actually be a little bit better on the offensive side of the football. So this will be the good test, though, just to see how different really the play calling in the offense is. But in week 1, you didn't really notice much.
I don't have super high hopes for Illinois this year. I don't think Brett Bielema is bad. He's actually had a more successful first few years than any Illinois coach in recent memory. And Luke Altmaier can run. He has his moments throwing the ball. He's also had a 4 interception game. That's what a lot of people think of, and I don't think that's a completely fair assessment. But when you look at this Jayhawks defense, you got to slow down Luke Altmaier. Maybe force a turnover or two. How did the Jayhawks go about doing that?
Well, so the good news, Altmaier had 14 turnovers last year, and he, I think, started 9 games, so it wasn't a full slate for him. You look at the first game, he did a good job protecting the football, but that's been in his DNA. And Kansas is a ball hawking secondary. You look at Mello Dotson, he had a pick 6 just last week. He had a couple touchdowns a season ago. He actually just last week broke the record for most pick 6s ahead of like Aqib Talib and some of these other guys for what he's been able to do.
Aqib Talib, what a great name.
I know,
what a great throwback name. Maybe the only old school Kansas football player that anybody listening to or watching the show knows.
Well, and so you might be hearing it again because he has a chance to pass him in like yards if he gets another pick. And then Kobe Bryant has a bunch of picks. OJ Burrows is kind of this ball hawking safety. So they're good at forcing interceptions. Last season, they forced one of the highest rates. I think they were 2nd and 3rd in the Big 12 in terms of forced fumbles, but they were like in the bottom half in terms of recoveries. So maybe you get more fumble luck in this game. But you got 2 interceptions off of Altmaier last year. And so I think Kansas is going to be good with the turnovers. The one that I'll be watching in this game is how do you stop his scrambling ability? You kind of talked about it there. You briefly mentioned that he can run a little bit, and he had like a 72-yard touchdown which was, if you go back and watch the game, it was just a mistake by the KU defense. Like he didn't get touched going to the end zone. Nobody was within like 20 yards of him. He just kind of strolled into the end zone, and he's been a good rushing quarterback. I was surprised when I read one of the preseason magazines and it said that he had the most scramble yards of any quarterback in the Big Ten, which then you start thinking about it and you're like, okay, well, like Justin Fields isn't here anymore. So like maybe that makes sense. But Kansas has struggled over the last couple of years. That's been one bugaboo for them with Brian Borland as the defense coordinator, stopping rushing quarterbacks, stopping scrambling quarterbacks. So I think they'll get a couple turnover-worthy plays. You obviously got to take advantage of them. Good news is they've been doing that with the personnel that they have over the past couple of years, but you also got to figure out a way to stop the QB run.
It's regret the graphic time, Derek. Let's make our predictions here. I will start. I'm still riding the Jayhawks. I feel great about them here. They're a 5-point favorite. I know this game is on the road. I'll take the Jayhawks to win 34-24. I think they go into Illinois and walk away with a win.
So I actually heard this is the first sellout that Illinois has had since like 2016, 2015, something like that, which is just bonkers to think about. That like, I don't know how many times they hosted Michigan or Ohio State in there and stuff during that span. But what I've since heard, because at first you start thinking, this could be a tough road environment, is that there's going to be a lot of Kansas fans traveling up to the game. It's driving distance away. I think this could be a cushiony road environment for KU. So I think the other day I gave a prediction of 31-27. I'm going to actually move that up a little bit and say they cover. I'll go 34-27 final score.
That's how it's playing out in the most under-the-radar game in all of college football. Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks. Derek, appreciate it.
Absolutely.